After days dominated by Donald Trump's standoff with Europe over Greenland, Iran is now back at the centre of the foreign policy agenda. President Trump has claimed he personally stopped what he said would have been the mass execution of hundreds of Iranian protesters, a claim Tehran has flatly denied. Iran's top prosecutor says no such order was ever issued, and he's described the US president's account as completely false. Meanwhile, Iranian activists are reporting a rapidly rising death toll from the regime's crackdown on nationwide demonstrations. Human rights groups say more than 5,000 people have been killed, most of them protesters. Reports say tens of thousands have been detained. It's against that backdrop that the US military has moved a major aircraft carrier strike group closer to the Middle East. The Pentagon says it's a precautionary move. Donald Trump has threatened the use of force against the Iranian regime if the killing of protesters in Iran continues. Speaking aboard Air Force One, he described the naval buildup as an armada and outlined the threats he had made.
837, mostly young men, were going to be hung on Thursday. And I said, if you hang those people, you're going to be hit harder than you've ever been hit. It'll make what we did to your Iran nuclear look like peanuts. And an hour before this horrible thing was going to take place, they canceled it. And they actually said they canceled it. They didn't postpone it. They canceled it. So that was a good sign. But we have an Armada. We have a massive fleet heading in that direction. And maybe we won't have to use it. We'll see.
Behnam Taleblu is a senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. Let's start with President Trump's claims. How credible do you find it that the US president stopped the execution of 837 detainees in Iran?
It's an excellent question because the real question underwriting that is, who told the president about this figure and about this alleged cancellation order? Is this the product of a potential Arakchi Iranian foreign minister, Witkoff, U.S. special envoy back channel? Or did this come through a potential intermediary country in the region, perhaps? Who knows? But suffice to say, this sort of behavior, meaning the regime's judiciary being able to bend in a direction that it does not actually bend in, which is in this side of justice rather than the side of injustice, it would be unprecedented and therefore out of character. So I do believe that the claim is, with respect, dubious. The fact that you have a chief top-level judiciary official mocking it recently adds to the fact that it is dubious. You've had a former international affairs advisor to the Iranian supreme leader also mock President Trump for believing this recently. So suffice to say, I don't think Washington should be taking solace in the fact that it has been able to get a stay of execution or a cancellation or a commutation of these sentences altogether when we continue to see videos occasionally coming out of Iran of the regime engaging in a brutal crackdown in what is actually their most violent crackdown in the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic.
And this is what is sort of part of the bleakest part of this picture. On the one hand, if it's true, we're talking about more than 800 people who won't be killed, while the regime has killed more than 5,000 people in this crackdown. Is this a particularly brutal crackdown, or is this just one of many that Iran has undertaken?
You hit the nail right on the head. This is what is fast amounting to be the most brutal crackdown from the state against the street in a rapid period of time, largely under the cover of a 2+ week internet outage in, again, the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic. And if you believe the other publicly reported figures, the 5,000 figure is confirmed by independent human rights agencies that can get you names, faces, places, pictures, last names, family accounts, secondary confirmations. But if you believe popular reporting, that is also talking to nurses, doctors, lawyers, hospitals, morgues, morticians, and people in the service industry, the number that you are hearing as a baseline is 20,000. And that means that this is the most violent crackdown from the state against the street, not just in the past 47 years, but in the past century or century and a half of modern or contemporary Iranian history. And again, a regime that is willing to do all of this to its own population, imagine what it would do to a foreign population. Imagine what it would do to people that it actually believes were trying to overthrow it. So this is really a horrifying moment in contemporary Iranian political history.
And so what does this horror tell us about where this regime is now? Are these mass killings, is that a result of, I don't know, a fear on the part of the regime? Has this been a particularly popular uprising, so the numbers killed on the streets are so much greater? What are we to learn of this carnage?
Well, it's falling back on a tried and true playbook of killing Iranians under the cover of darkness that we saw attempted in November 2019, where for 3 to 6 days of an internet blackout, 1,500 people were killed, quite literally with weapons of war in several very localized areas. But these protests have touched all of Iran's 31 very different provinces. It spiraled very quickly from an economic trigger for protests into a mass political contagion of popular protests from the street against the state, not going for economic reform or social reform, but wholesale political change. And the violence that we see enacted is a measure of fear of the regime, fear of this contagion effect continuing to grow, and also cognizance of how far the regime has fallen and also how tough of a position they are in, because make no mistake, these protests follow less than 6 months after the 12-day war, where the regime was beaten and battered abroad and now is looking to project strength at home against unarmed protesters. So because of the strategic situation, because of the timing, because of the context, and because also the fear, all of these things point to one conclusion for the regime, which is that the regime believed it could shoot its way out of the crisis. And then right now it will be up to Donald Trump to see if he can prove them wrong.
OK, and Donald Trump now has an aircraft carrier strike group moving closer to the region. Let us speculate. What do you think this will do, this strike group? What's it there to do, and under what sort of circumstances?
A strike group that also contains many fighter jets, as well as an attack submarine, as well as a new squadron of F-15s coming to Jordan, as well as more ballistic missile defense capabilities moving to the Arab side of the Persian Gulf, in addition to the buildup that was already there, as well as, of course, America's major partner, Israel, rushing to rebuild its air and missile defenses, which is among the most layered in the world after the 12-day war. So the region is ready. The region is gearing up to make sure that the Islamic Republic knows it cannot escalate if Donald Trump chooses to engage in a punishing military response to enforce his own red line against the population. But again, President Trump, being the negotiator-in-chief as well as the commander-in-chief, is looking for all options to be on the table. If past this prologue, that might mean military strikes, that might mean all this talk of potential talk or hyping the stay of execution could be a dupe or could be a head feint so that the president can actually double down on the military option at a time that is most surprising to the adversary and most advantageous to him. But make no mistake, I think Trump is interested in keeping all options on the table, A, because personally he likes flexibility, but B, because it keeps both allies and adversaries guessing up until the last moment. The reason I would say this is different and why you don't want everyone guessing consistently is because of the multiple times he has drawn that red line and the high casualty counts we have in Tehran.
OK, but on that, if we talk about Trump's desire for stability, these things get messy very, very quickly. If this did become a shooting war, if he did take out the regime, that's not going to end neatly. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything ends up being happily ever after, does it? Surely what you get is years and years of chaos and strife.
Well, I would say that by keeping the Islamic Republic at the helm and not dealing with this issue earlier, we have locked in, and Americans in the region and the multiple cycle of violence that the region have seen, let alone the multiple cycles of violence from the state against the street in response to protests, have been the result of trying to preference stability over paying some of these costs, and instead having to have us, having to have the region, and also having to have the Iranian people pay that cost upfront as they have already. So in many ways, that equilibrium has already shifted. It would be a mistake to say that the alternative to a strike is stasis, is stability, is peace, because clearly those are not the prerogatives of the Islamic Republic. at home or abroad. And more fundamentally, I would say, again, much will depend, to the heart of your question, on the targets. If President Trump chooses to go kinetic, the targets that he chooses to strike. He could try to first suppress Iranian missile fire to limit the ability of the regime to go back. He could try to engage in a low-intensity responsibility to protect campaign to support Iranian protesters as they take back onto the streets. Or he could go big and go after political targets or command and control. The options really are all up to him right now. We simply don't know the direction he'll go in, nor do we know what relationship a potential strike may have with his larger and pre-existing Iran strategy of maximum pressure.
That's a fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it. Behnam Ben Taleblu from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much.